Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, welcome. We have a formulaic problem in Washington, and it's this. Good intentions plus more money means good outcomes. That's not necessarily true, especially when you're dealing with multilateral institutions that sometimes can become bloated and elitist and are not tethered to holistic, integrated metrics that are constantly presented. I'm amazed at, during budget season, how some institutions who really never show up start coming around when budgets are threatened. You mentioned that sanctions are a very powerful tool. So are budgets. They tend to focus the mind. Now, in this regard, though, I want to try to get you to reconcile some comments you made last year at this hearing with some of the cuts that you've proposed. For instance, you mentioned that the Global Environmental Facility, the GEF, was one of the most important or most effective programs in the field serving U.S. interests. You've got a proposed 50% reduction. The Feed the Future program, widely supported bipartisan initiative in Congress to rethink how we protect our most vulnerable, leverage aid capacity with other nations, and build out the infrastructure that attacks systemic poverty and helps those who are most vulnerable. The multilateral development banks that are proposed for significant cuts are an integral part of Feed the Future. So, in one sense, again, budget reductions or proposed budget reductions can help focus the mind of institutions that may not be as efficient as you just said, and yet at the same time, I need to better understand your strategy in this regard. The comment that you did give that contribution levels that are more appropriately relative to our partner countries and we seek to balance priorities is vague. So can you help me understand the strategy that you're implementing here with these proposed reductions, particularly in light of what I think is a generous comment to you earlier, that sometimes wielding budgets can actually help focus the mind and bring about reform, but it has to be tethered to a strategy.
Well, I agree with that completely. And the budget process is very important in making sure we align the strategy. And quite frankly, I think we appreciate what you approved last year, and we look forward to working with you this year. Specifically, as it relates to the Global Environmental Facility, there's a lot of different facilities that focus on environmental issues. This is just one of them. As it relates to this facility, again, the reason why we're comfortable cutting the facility or asking for a cut in half is because this facility has defined obligations. A significant amount of them have already been impacted, and this is what we think is needed to meet our commitments of what this facility is supposed to do. As I think your other question was around, was it the International Fund for Agricultural and Development, where we don't have a request this year. Again, there's other areas in the government. We very much support food security and food safety and everything else. There's other areas of the government, specifically in USAID, which are much more efficient. Again, these facilities are some of our smaller facilities, but we look forward to working with you on them.
Well, in regards to that comment, I understand David Malpass has now been confirmed as your Undersecretary, so we would appreciate a very rapid opportunity to integrate with him and his strategy in this regard. Again, because some of our programs designed to build out the sustainable economic infrastructure to attack systemic poverty, which Feed the Future is fundamental to, are tied inextricably to some of the multilateral development banks. So if that's just being pushed to, that intention is being pushed more to USAID, then we have to, because you don't feel like it's properly embedded in your department any longer, we have to understand the fullness of the implications of this. So it's not a cut per se, but it's a change in strategy. But I think the broader piecing together of that strategy has to have a fuller conversation, or else we're going to undermine the intent of Congress. That's some very important a new architecture for the 21st century that's emerging in terms of both food aid and economic regeneration possibility for the world's poorest. So what I don't want to end up is with a budget cut or not. Is the budget cut tied to the broader strategy of meeting the mission goals?
Good. Well, Next week, we have the World Bank and IMF meetings, but I'll ask David Malpass to come and see you the following week and coordinate with you and your staff, and he can come discuss the strategy with you more carefully.
Thank you very much. Mr. Secretary, I want to return just briefly to the Global Environment Facility, the GEF. You've given your answer, but one thing to keep in mind is I think the administration has done a very good job of encouraging a reset in a lot of our multinational agreements and relationships. In other words, saying in this century, the United States sacrifice and generosity has to be partnered in an authentic way with your own sacrifice and contributions. Regarding the GEF, it's important to keep in mind that the U.S. contribution is leveraged 6-to-1 by other major donors. So this will probably continue to come before the committee because there is, as you suggest, maybe the narrower mission might be somewhat accomplished, but there are broader aspects of dynamics out there regarding emerging missions. Wildlife trafficking has its tied to terrorist funding, as well as sustainability issues in terms of attacking global poverty that are important to see through the lens of this facility as well. But I'll leave it there for now. You mentioned in your testimony, and clearly these are priorities for you, relationship with the World Bank and the IMF. Our alternative executive director to the IMF, I would encourage you to put as a part of our mission, or make it a priority as a part of our mission, the fight of anti-corruption, or bring a fight to anti-corruption measures in international finance institutions. This is very important so that we ensure, back to the longer-term strategy, if we're participating in multilateral initiatives, that it is going to the right place to help the most vulnerable and to build out the sustainable systems that actually bring about protection for those who are most in need and just governance structures. I think the IMF, with its extraordinary role that it plays in reform around the world, should integrate this into their primary mission. I'd like your perspective on that.
I agree with you, and we look forward to following up and talking about that, but I do agree with you.
Let me ask, go to the JCPOA one more time as well. What will you recommend to the President?
I'm not going to, in this setting, comment on my personal recommendations to the President. Those are obviously confidential, but I am integrally involved in this, and I support the President's view, and we think very similarly on this.
I didn't think you'd answer the question, and I respect your prudence in that regard, but it was meant to be provocative. Obviously, this is coming upon us quickly, and given Congress's the problem we have of lurching from crisis to crisis without the ability to think through long-term strategic planning, I do think that both the consequences of being in this and the consequences of not being in this to be thoroughly thought through and in a dynamic, ongoing conversation with us, if it does need to be in private, is of absolute urgency.
Okay, and I just want to assure you, these discussions have been going on for the last year. The President has signed the waiver several times with very clear instructions as to what he's wanted to do. I look forward to hopefully Director Pompeo being confirmed soon, because he's been an integral part of these discussions, and he would, in his new role, continue to be.
Well, look, a lot of us I didn't vote for the agreement either. One of the reasons I didn't was concerned about Iran's ballistic missile program, and there were dynamics associated with the agreement that clearly have unleashed that. However, what we do not want to end up with, obviously, is some type of new arms race in the Middle East, or our inability to actually leverage with international partners outcomes that we see that are desirable. If it's a delay moving toward a permanent stopping of Iran's nuclear weapons capability, wonderful. Losing that, though, is, of course, a huge problem and demands that we have an alternative strategy in place. But you've offered several times to meet in confidence or in another setting with some of us. I'd appreciate being a part of that. Mr. Secretary, could I be a part of that?
Oh, yes, I'm sorry. I thought that was, I shook my head.
It was both a question and a statement. Thank you.